December 1944. Snow pressed down upon the Ardennes forest with crushing weight. Only the sound of marching feet and the far-off chatter of automatic weapons disturbed its stillness. High in the frozen branches, German marksmen squinted through optics that misted over in the bitter temperature. For years they had depended on catching their enemies unaware. A single bullet, a single target eliminated, then melting back into the gray winter haze. But across this theater of war, something deeply troubling had started to unfold. Emerging from devastated hamlets and broken fence lines, American troops wielded a firearm that did not boom like a Garand or clap like a Thompson. It hissed with a quiet, menacing tone that chilled soldiers who had long assumed they commanded the hours after sunset. The M3 submachine gun, swiftly nicknamed the grease gun by those who bore it into combat, had never been crafted with beauty in mind. Pressed metal components, bare-bones architecture, and an appearance so austere it resembled equipment abandoned in an industrial workspace. Yet this was far from ordinary hardware. When operated by capable hands, it became an instrument of silent death. Launching .45 caliber bullets at intimate distances, it granted American foot soldiers a fresh kind of dominance throughout the war-torn landscapes of Europe. German commanders had consistently instructed their troops to view American creativity as rough, factory-line overproduction. What caught them unprepared was a firearm that embraced those exact characteristics: straightforwardness, affordability, and practicality, and weaponized them into something terrifying. Its production cost was minimal, requiring only a small portion of what the respected Thompson demanded. Manufacturing could proceed rapidly with reduced labor hours and less specialized equipment, ensuring greater quantities arrived at combat zones in unprecedented time frames. When German reconnaissance first detected its characteristic stuttering report in the blackness, they assumed it signaled faulty weaponry, but as fellow soldiers collapsed at 20 paces, hammered by a deluge of hefty .45 projectiles, understanding arrived swiftly. The grease gun required no sophistication. It required only consistent performance, regardless of location, regardless of who pulled the trigger. American GIs quickly uncovered its tactical benefits. Compared to the bulkier Thompson, the M3's condensed dimensions and reduced firing rate rendered it manageable. Stable even when gripped through thick gloves beneath winter clouds. Throughout the maze of devastated urban centers, Aachen, Metz, Bastogne, the grease gun transformed into a natural extension of the soldier's intent. And for the German sharpshooter gazing downward from a crumbling church spire, it signified dread. For the first time, darkness no longer favored them exclusively. The M3's genesis reached far beyond the frozen European woodlands, back to the production facilities of Detroit and the workstations of designers challenged with addressing a highly particular dilemma. By 1942, American military leadership recognized that the Thompson, despite its potency, proved costly and labor-intensive to construct. Its meticulously tooled components required expert craftsmen, and every moment dedicated to fashioning one meant fewer arms reaching soldiers abroad. The War Department demanded something more economical, quicker and simpler to manufacture without compromising killing power. The answer proved revolutionary in its directness, a firearm constructed not for aesthetic appeal, but for sheer volume. General Motors, through its inland division, received the contract, and what materialized bore no resemblance to the refined firearms or decorated handguns of previous eras. The M3 emerged from industrial presses and welding equipment rather than precision machinery. Whole sections of the weapon originated from sheet metal, bent and fused into form. It embodied pure functionality, a manifestation of America's manufacturing ethos. Deliver the firearm to every soldier requiring it, and do so immediately. During testing, it validated its capabilities. The grease gun's 45 ACP ammunition delivered identical stopping force as the Thompson, yet housed in a lighter frame. Its firing rhythm, barely exceeding 400 rounds per minute, lagged far behind the Thompson's pace. However, this characteristic emerged as an asset rather than a limitation. Where the Thompson frequently kicked upward during sustained fire, the M3 maintained steadiness, its volleys measured, its precision reliable amid the disorder of urban warfare. A combatant could dispatch controlled shots instead of exhausting valuable rounds in undisciplined salvos. By 1943, these firearms were crossing the Atlantic, packed into containers labeled not with ceremony, but with the stark pragmatism of wartime manufacturing. Soldiers initially mocked their unadorned construction. They joked that the weapon resembled a maintenance device more than a firearm, its cylindrical body and basic wire frame giving it the look of something retrieved from a repairman's toolkit. The designation grease gun endured, but beneath the mockery grew deepening admiration. In waterlogged trenches, in demolished farmsteads, in the darkened recesses of obliterated streets, the M3 demonstrated its value. German troops who previously ridiculed American dependence on industrial quantity now confronted the consequences of that approach directly. By the winter of 1944, the grease gun had evolved beyond an unproven prototype. It had become a reliable partner in the savage close-range engagements that characterized the European theater. American tank operators, specifically, lauded it. The M3's condensed profile permitted it to fit within the confined spaces of Shermans and half-tracks, where every centimeter mattered. A Thompson might catch on entry points or consume already scarce crew space, but the M3 secured easily into storage, prepared for deployment the moment a hatch opened. Tank personnel who previously defended themselves exposed with only sidearms suddenly possessed a weapon capable of unleashing substantial firepower at arm's length. Ground troops likewise began recognizing its merit during building-to-building combat. In Normandy's hedgerow country, in the demolished remnants of Saint-Lô, and in the defended municipalities of Alsace, the M3's steady bursts proved critical. A team sweeping a basement could depend on their lead soldier to fire with precision without squandering ammunition or risking mechanical failures. German forces familiar with controlling intimate encounters through their lethal MP-40 found that their superiority had diminished against the .45 caliber projectiles of the M3. Flimsy barriers and hastily constructed obstacles provided minimal defense. Even more disturbing to German marksmen was the quiet manner in which it distributed fear. Unlike the sharp report of a Garand, the M3's muffled sound seemed to blend into the tumult of warfare. A sniper who exposed his location faced a wave of .45 fire coursing through openings and beams, destroying concealment and compelling him to flee his station. Seized German documentation began referencing this American oil can weapon as an escalating danger in metropolitan clashes. The construction was not flawless. The charging mechanism, a lever on the flank of initial versions, tended to snap during harsh handling. Soldiers complained about its fragile protective cover that occasionally refused to remain closed. Yet, despite all its shortcomings, the M3's paramount virtue was operational dependability during engagement. Dirt, precipitation, or freezing temperatures could not readily disable it. American logistical networks guaranteed replacement components, and substitutes were consistently accessible, reinforcing a reality that troubled German leadership. Every deficiency in American engineering was balanced by the enormous scope of their production capacity. What mattered ultimately was that when a soldier pressed the trigger, the weapon discharged heavy rounds until the mission concluded. The Battle of the Bulge would cement the M3's standing in combat and cold. As German armies initiated their unexpected assault through the Ardennes, American formations discovered themselves encircled, isolated, and outnumbered. In the forests surrounding Bastogne, airborne soldiers of the 101st dug defensive positions, awaiting reinforcement that appeared doubtful. Amid sub-freezing temperatures and snow-buried foxholes, the M3 became essential. Its measured, calculated firing rate enabled paratroopers to preserve ammunition while still delivering bursts that deterred hostile movements. At distances where standard rifles faltered in dense vegetation, the grease guns communicated with force. For German snipers, habituated to intimidating separated positions, circumstances had transformed. When they disclosed their concealed nests, American teams no longer depended exclusively on long-range rifles to neutralize them. A grease gun could be aimed at a structure's exterior, and within moments, mortar, timber, and windows disintegrated under the force of 45 rounds. Intelligence gathered from imprisoned Wehrmacht personnel indicated mounting apprehension of American submachine guns, especially during nocturnal operations where sight was restricted. One detainee characterized the unsettling impact of detecting what he termed a hacking phantom in the void, its cadence methodical, its consequences fatal. The supply advantages of the grease gun also fulfilled a crucial function. Because it was inexpensive and rapid to produce, enormous numbers reached forward positions despite the disorder of late 1944 distribution networks. Conversely, German manufacturing facilities, already burdened by Allied bombardment and material scarcities, could not replicate output levels. Their personnel carried expertly crafted weapons, but in insufficient quantities to counter the tide of stamped steel arriving from American factories. In the streets of Bastogne, in frozen hamlets, where skirmishes erupted chamber to chamber, the grease gun secured a harsh reputation. Soldiers reported that its wire frame could be collapsed for navigating through restricted passages, then extended immediately for steadiness. Every characteristic appeared tailored for the violent proximity of European warfare, where the gap between predator and prey was calculated in meters rather than open ground. For the Americans who transported it, the grease gun was no longer a temporary measure or a budget substitute. It represented survival. For the Germans who encountered it, it was evidence that the industrial powerhouse had discovered another method to shift the balance of conflict. By the spring of 1945, as American armies pressed further into Germany's interior, the grease gun had established its historical significance. It accompanied tank crews charging across the Rhine, infantry units clearing devastated industrial complexes in the Ruhr, and airborne forces progressing through settlements that smoldered beneath prolonged bombardment. Wherever combat compressed into passages, fortifications, and underground spaces, the M3 became the firearm soldiers selected reflexively. It was not the weapon of ceremonial displays or promotional imagery. It was the weapon of earth, masonry fragments, and haze-filled corridors. German files seized in those concluding weeks show a reluctant recognition. Marksmen, previously assured in their capacity to immobilize units with a lone shot, started documenting the pointlessness of shooting into locations where responsive bursts from the grease gun could clear entire window frames or tear through overhead structures. The weapon did not equal the exactness of an optical rifle, but exactness was no longer the determining element. Firepower that materialized rapidly and without pause was what reversed outcomes. A sniper concealed in an upper level could stall a patrol for minutes. A grease gun could eliminate that upper level in seconds. What distinguished the M3 was not flawlessness, but philosophy. It exemplified the manufacturing strength of a nation that prioritized arming every soldier with adequate means to accomplish objectives. Each pressed steel receiver, each collapsible stock, each loaded magazine was a testament that triumph was manufactured not merely in battles, but in industrial plants operated by common citizens, homemakers, agricultural workers, and machine operators. Many inexperienced in their trades constructed a tool that influenced the outcome of intimate combat. In its plainness resided its brilliance. When the weapons ultimately ceased firing in May, veterans recalled the grease gun with a sort of coarse fondness. It had vibrated in armored vehicles, struck against helmets in overcrowded transport carriers, and dropped to the floors of defensive positions as soldiers reloaded in obscurity. Yet it had performed, inexpensive, dependable, lethal. For the men who transported it, it embodied the understanding that sometimes triumph resides not in the graceful or the intricate, but in the functional and the unyielding. For the Germans who confronted it, it was the concluding resonance of a conflict they could no longer prevail in. A recognition that in the ruins of war-torn Europe, the darkness now belonged to another.